The unmistakable crunch of metal echoed down Maple Ridge Drive as a fully loaded dump truck rolled over a silver Rolls-Royce Karen and screamed from her perfectly manicured lawn, powerless to stop what was happening as I calmly climbed down from the cab. My driveway was finally clear. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name is David Morrison, and I've lived in the Oakwood Heights neighborhood for 12 years. It's one of those suburban communities where every lawn is measured to regulation height and mailboxes must be approved by committee. The HOA here has always been strict, but things took a dark turn when Karen became president 3 years ago. Karen treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. She patrolled the streets daily in her silver Rolls-Royce, clipboard in hand, looking for violations. She once fined my neighbor $200 for planting petunias instead of pansies. Another time she measured the distance between fence posts with a ruler and issued citations for anyone off by more than half an inch. Things between us hit a new level when I began renovating my backyard last month. I wanted to build a modest deck and install a small koi pond. I followed every rule, submitted detailed plans, and paid for all the required permits. Through the city, everything was approved and stamped by both the city planning department and the HOA architectural committee. But Karen had other ideas. She showed up at my door the morning construction was set to begin, wearing her signature purple blazer with the HOA president pin prominently displayed. She announced in her shrill voice that my permits were quote invalid unquote because I hadn't personally asked for her blessing. When I showed her the signed approvals from the architectural committee, she claimed they didn't have the authority to approve such major changes without her direct oversight. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that I'd followed every procedure in the HOA charter. She just smirked and said she'd be reviewing the matter personally. The next morning I woke up to find her Rolls-Royce parked sideways across my driveway, completely blocking access. My construction crew arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, took one look at the situation, and called me outside. The foreman, a patient man named Tony Russo, shook his head as we stood there staring at the luxury car. He told me his trucks couldn't get in to deliver materials, and his crew couldn't start work without access to the backyard through my driveway. I assured him this would be resolved quickly and walked next door to Karen's house. She answered the door with a satisfied smile, still in her bathrobe and holding a cup of coffee. Before I could speak, she said with a triumphant tone that she was protecting the neighborhood from unauthorized construction. I reminded her that everything was fully authorized, but she just laughed and said that until she personally reviewed and approved my permits, her car would stay exactly where it was each day that week. Her Rolls-Royce sat in my driveway like a monument to spite. I left polite notes on her windshield, which she crumpled up and tossed on my lawn. I tried calling her, but she'd blocked my number. At the monthly HOA meeting, she actually bragged about teaching me a lesson about respecting the chain of command. Several neighbors looked uncomfortable, but no one dared speak up against her. She even posted on the neighborhood Facebook page, writing long rants about residents who thought they could circumvent her authority. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew who she meant. The comments section turned into a battlefield, with some supporting her strict enforcement while others called her behavior harassment. Meanwhile, my contractor Tony was growing frustrated. He'd scheduled his crew specifically for my project and was losing money every day. They couldn't work by Thursday. He pulled me aside and said in a serious tone that if this wasn't resolved by Monday, he'd have to move on to other jobs. The materials sitting in his warehouse were already paid for, and I'd lose my deposit if the project was canceled. That evening, I did what I should have done from the start. I sat down with a copy of the HOA charter and read every single page. What I found was illuminating. According to Article 7, Section 4, any vehicle blocking a resident's driveway without permission could be considered trespassing. More importantly, Section 6 stated that the HOA president had no veto power over decisions made by the architectural committee. I also discovered that Karen had been overstepping her authority in numerous ways. The charter clearly limited the president's powers, requiring board approval for most decisions, yet she'd been acting unilaterally for months, intimidating residents into compliance with threats of fines that weren't even legal under our bylaws. Armed with this information, I drafted a formal letter citing the relevant sections of the charter. I sent it certified mail and posted a copy on her door, giving her 24 hours to remove her vehicle or I would take legal action. I even included photos of her car blocking my driveway and documentation of my approved permits. The next morning her Rolls-Royce was still there, but now she'd added a handwritten sign to the windshield that read "Presidential Privilege." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. That's when I noticed she'd also installed a security camera pointed at her car, apparently thinking it would protect her from any retaliation. I called my lawyer friend, Robert Chen, who confirmed that I was well within my rights. He said with an amused tone that Karen had actually made things worse for herself by documenting her own trespassing with that camera. He advised me to give her one more written warning, then take whatever legal means necessary to clear my property. So I typed up another letter, this time with legal letterhead. Robert had provided it stated clearly that if the vehicle wasn't removed within 12 hours, I would have it removed at her expense. I taped it to her front door and her car windshield, took photos for documentation, and waited. That evening at 6 p.m. the deadline passed with her Rolls still blocking my driveway. Karen was in her front yard pruning her roses and humming to herself, occasionally glancing my way. With a smug expression, she called out in a sing-song voice that she hoped I was learning my lesson about respecting authority. That's when I put my plan into action. You see, I'd already scheduled a gravel delivery for my backyard project, 20 tons of gravel requiring a massive dump truck to deliver. I called the company and explained the situation, asking if they could still make the delivery despite the obstruction. The dispatcher, a woman named Gloria Santos, listened to my story and said she'd send their most experienced driver who could handle tight spaces. The next morning at 7 a.m. sharp, I heard the rumble of a massive engine. The dump truck that turned onto our street was bigger than I'd expected, a genuine 6-ton beast. With a full load, the driver, a mountain of a man named Big Jim Thompson, climbed out and surveyed the situation. He looked at the Rolls-Royce blocking my driveway, then at me, then back at the car. I showed him all my documentation, including the property survey proving the driveway was mine, the letters I'd sent Karen, photos of her ignoring no parking notices, and the legal authorization for my lawyer. Big Jim studied everything carefully, then asked in a growly voice if I was absolutely sure about this. I told him I was. He climbed back into his cab and started maneuvering the massive truck. Karen must have heard the engine because she came running out of her house still in her pajamas and collars. She screamed at the top of her lungs for him to stop, waving her arms frantically, but Big Jim just focused on his task, slowly backing the truck up toward my driveway. The first contact was almost gentle, just the truck's reinforced bumper kissing the Rolls-Royce's trunk. Karen shrieked and ran toward the truck, but I stepped in her path and reminded her she was trespassing on my property. She threatened to call the police, and I encouraged her to do so, holding up my folder of documentation. Big Jim continued backing up, and the sound that followed was unforgettable. The Rolls-Royce's trunk crumpled like aluminum foil. The rear windshield exploded in a shower of safety glass. The car's alarm went off, adding to the chaos as Karen screamed about lawsuits and jail time. But Big Jim wasn't done. He needed to position the truck properly to dump the gravel in my backyard. This required him to push the luxury car completely out of the way. The dump truck's massive weight made short work of it. The Rolls-Royce folded in on itself, tires popping, metal groaning and screaming as it was compressed to half its original size. Several neighbors had come out to watch the spectacle. Mrs. Anderson from across the street was recording everything on her phone. Mr. Patel from 2 houses down gave me a subtle thumbs up. Even Karen's usual supporters looked shocked at how far things had escalated. Once the car was sufficiently flattened and pushed aside, Big Jim proceeded to back into my driveway and dump the gravel exactly where I'd requested. He worked with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen it all, ignoring Karen's continued screaming and threats. When he finished, he handed me the delivery receipt, tipped his baseball cap, and drove away. Karen had indeed called 911 during the ordeal. 2 police officers arrived just as Big Jim was leaving. Officer Rebecca Martinez and her partner, Officer James Liu, listened patiently as Karen ranted about destruction of property demanding I be arrested immediately. Her voice had reached a pitch that could shatter glass. Then it was my turn. I calmly presented my documentation to the officers: the property survey, the trespassing notices, the photos of her illegal parking, the certified letters, and the legal authorization. Officer Martinez examined everything carefully while Officer Liu walked around the flattened Rolls-Royce, taking photos. After conferring privately, the officers returned with their verdict. Officer Martinez informed Karen in a professional tone that she was the one who had broken the law by blocking my driveway. Not only was she guilty of trespassing, but she'd ignored multiple legal warnings. Instead of arresting me, they issued her a citation for illegal parking and trespassing. Karen's face turned purple as she sputtered in disbelief. She demanded to speak to their supervisor, the chief of police, the mayor, anyone who would listen. Officer Liu calmly explained that she could contest the citation in court, but the evidence was overwhelmingly against her. They also informed her she'd be responsible for the towing fees to remove what was left of her car. As the officers left, Karen stood in my driveway staring at her destroyed Rolls-Royce. The tow truck arrived an hour later, and the driver whistled low when he saw the damage. He said in an impressed tone that he'd need special equipment to remove it, and it would cost extra. Karen just nodded numbly, apparently in shock. The next few weeks were eventful. Karen filed an insurance claim for her Rolls-Royce, fully expecting a huge payout. Instead, she got a letter from her insurance company denying the claim. According to what I heard from Mrs. Anderson, who knew someone at the insurance office, the adjuster had written that the damage resulted from, quote, acts of stupidity, end quote, and wasn't covered under her policy. She then tried to sue me in civil court, but when the judge reviewed the evidence, including the security camera footage from her own car showing her repeatedly ignoring legal notices, he not only dismissed her case but ordered her to pay my legal fees. The total came to $8,750. The HOA board called an emergency meeting after numerous complaints from residents about Karen's behavior. For the first time in years, the community room was packed. One by one, neighbors stood up and shared stories of Karen's abuse of power. The treasurer revealed she'd been using HOA funds for personal expenses, including gas for her patrol drives. When it came time to vote, the board unanimously removed Karen from her position as president. She sat in stunned silence as they also voted to ban her from holding any HOA position for 5 years. As the gavel came down on the final vote, Karen's face crumbled and she burst into tears, running from the